Hi everyone, I'm Angie, and I wanted to share a really positive update about Matthew. He's been going through a lot with his cancer treatment, and he's been doing a combination of chemo and immunotherapy, which is the treatment that you've helped me raise some money towards for him. He's been able to take a short break from chemo lately, and he's kindly agreed to let me ask him a few questions about his treatment and his goals and a few things. Yes. Some people know who you are and they want to know how you are, and other people don't know who you are. So perhaps, yeah, you can fill them in on both sides of that.
Yeah. So I've been dealing with stage 4 cancer now for 6.5 years, almost 7 years. Stage 4 just means the cancer has spread a lot in the body or spread to like faraway bits from where it began, which means it's difficult to treat and is generally considered terminal. So it's going to be the thing that finishes you off. And I got to what's called NED, no evidence of disease, or sometimes termed full remission, which was great. And I continued treatment after that for a year. And then it felt it was safe to stop the treatment and continued having regular checkups. Had the scan, found some new cancer. So yeah, basically from November last year, November 2022, I started chemotherapy again, which is not fun. But because of the crowdfunding, I've been having immunotherapy as well. And the kind of immunotherapy I have helps, kind of goes very well with chemotherapy. So the chemotherapy is on a cycle with like 6-day breaks in between. It's like a 3-week cycle, and I try to have immunotherapy in those breaks if funds are available.
And so you've been able to do that some of the time.
Absolutely, yeah. Like quite a few cycles now. And the results have just been kind of amazing.
How did you feel after getting your latest scan
How did I feel? I
initially?
felt pleased. It was kind of a surprise to see just how well the treatment had worked. My immunotherapist was very confident, saying, "Oh, you're going to get a good scan result," and I was thinking maybe. So yeah, I should say that typically cancer patients will have blood tests like every month, and you can measure these things that are called tumor markers, or some people call them biomarkers, which is like actually a more general term. And for me, over the past probably year and a half, those tumor markers are not proven useful. So basically, they're not reflecting what's happening. So what that means is when I go into a scan, so if a scan maybe every 3 months, it's a bit kind of tense because it's not like, oh, I've had good blood test results for the past 3 months, so the scan should be fine. It's more like the blood tests are not reliable, they're not useful anymore as a way of monitoring the cancer. So yeah, we'll just have to see what the scan brings. So yeah, I was pleased, and just the idea of just being able to take a bit of a break from chemotherapy was really wonderful. And then finding out that I can actually cut out the most toxic of the 3 chemo drugs, that's really great.
That's awesome. So in the break now, I suppose you've got another almost a week left. Any further plans on how you can spend your time?
So one of the things though is, so when you have the break from the chemotherapy, your body doesn't know that it's break time, and chemotherapy doesn't know it's break time. So the side effects continue for quite a while after you stop chemotherapy. And one of the drugs I've got, the side effects will stop like months and months and months after I eventually stop this drug. So I've still been dealing with the side effects, although they're much more mild and they're tapering off. So yeah, I've kind of just been taking it easy and trying to get outside as much as possible. So then I'm just very fortunate that my chemo break has coincided with a really quite significant improvement in the weather. So that the reason that's very relevant is that with a lot of chemotherapy, you feel the cold a lot more. That I find is quite, not exactly depressing, but quite dispiriting right? Because it makes you feel kind of frail and weak. So the really nice thing about this chemo break is that I've been exercising a bit again and going, like, spending more time outside and going for long walks and things. And it's like, wow, I feel kind of okay. This is amazing, because it's quite, yeah, that's been a real struggle with the cancer, is just like feeling frail and weak and
Another,
just not something that I would usually apply to myself. Those,
no, that's not an easy thing to,
yeah.
doesn't sound like a thing to deal with. So you said you've been getting outside a bit more, and have you noticed those improvements then since taking the break from chemo?
I can make myself notice them, I think. So what I mean by that is, like, when you're on the heavy chemo, you have a lot of fatigue, and things like
Mm,
just spending like a day out can be quite an exhausting thing.
mm,
And
mm.
at the moment I can, like, function relatively normally, and it's just amazing. And yeah, I sometimes kind of stop and think, like, wow, if this was just 4 weeks ago, I'd be collapsing in a chair now. Yeah. So yeah, it's a noticeable, really significant difference. Mm.
Awesome. So,
So the oncologist, so that's like the main cancer doctor, when I went back to him after quite a few years of not seeing him, he was a bit surprised how alive I was.
how
Um,
alive you? There's a
and
level of alive.
but then, yeah, he was saying hopefully with the chemotherapy it would be able to stop the cancer spreading more and possibly keep
Mm,
tumors stable. But of course, combined with the immunotherapy, what's happened is, I think since November, or in fact since October last year, when the scan first found the new tumors, there's been something like 80% shrinkage, which is really amazing for someone that's had cancer a long time, because the tumors or cancer cells in your body will become more and more chemotherapy resistant.
mm.
So now, after like 6.5 years, I'm at the kind of time where drugs I've drugs that have stopped working in the past shouldn't really be working now, but combined with immunotherapy, it seems to be working really well at the moment.
That's really good to hear. Um, Scanning through my questions now. So Matthew, you've been helping other patients along your journey for quite a while now and supporting people looking for treatment.
Yeah,
Would you like to briefly sort of summarize what your aims for that are? Um,
tiny bit of background of how it started was just being in some of those online cancer groups, particularly some of the online Facebook groups.
mm,
The people who survive a long time, people notice that and kind of ask questions. So a new person will arrive in a group and say, I've just been diagnosed with such and such type of cancer and I'm on this kind of treatment. Has anyone else been in this situation? And of course, for a
mm,
big Facebook group with 5,000 members, a whole bunch of people are going to say, yes, of course, we've been in this situation. So people notice, someone says that, oh, I've just started this drug. And I'm like, yeah, I did that for 4 years. Or
mm,
people notice that I've had surgery and chemotherapy and molecular type therapy and various kinds of radiation therapy and immunotherapy and hypothermia therapy and metabolic therapy. So people were just asking me some of the same questions again and again, and
mm,
people were messaging me directly saying, like, oh, I've heard you've had treatment in Japan. Can anyone go and have treatment in Japan? Or I've heard you had this certain type of immunotherapy. How can I have it? So I just sort of, it was just natural to want to, like, be a bit more organized about that, so that I wasn't just dealing with all these kind of questions. And then in parallel to that, yeah, I was also noticing problems like there's a lack of communication between let's say cancer doctors, so like oncologists, and other
mm,
specialists. There's a lack of understanding between them. There's a lack of communication between cancer specialists, oncologists, and researchers. So
mm,
researchers, particularly the ones that are doing the very kind of fundamental research, where there's such a long break, there's such a long gap between their discovery and a treatment coming 10, 15 years later. So I thought, well, that's something I kind of know about, like how you connect people together and how you train people, just because of some of my background and particularly how I use technology to connect people up. So that was one of the things, was I just thought I want to be better, or I want to help people connect together, and I want to educate, for example, help educate oncologists about what other specialists are doing, and help the oncologists have a way of judging, I guess, whether other treatments that they're not familiar with are applicable, useful, valid treatments. Cancer is kind of quite unique in that it takes a long time to prove a treatment is beneficial. And if there are early stage patients, you don't want to risk them. You don't want them to risk something that's really kind of unproven. Whereas for late stage patients, we want to get the newest treatment possible, and we do not have time to wait the years and years and years to prove. And there are economic issues as well with kind of, if you have a treatment that takes 7 years to get out to patients, well, in 7 years' time, the world's changed quite a bit, and the treatment might be completely redundant. Someone might have come along with something, after 5 years that takes them 2 years to get out, and your 7 years is now kind of wasted, right? If it, there's not necessarily any transfer at all from, your treatment to someone else's, or even to just like the general understanding of cancer, because a lot of these treatments, nobody knows how they really work. They have kind of theories and models, and then after some years they're like, oh, we thought it worked in this way and we were wrong.
Right.
So
that's what science is, isn't it? Learning.
So a lot of my work is about that kind of thing. So providing good quality information to patients and to carers, providing direct support. So still, people message me and email me on a daily basis and say, my father has just been diagnosed with, stage 3 pancreatic cancer. What can I do? And I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I cannot give medical advice, but here are some things to look into.
Which is incredibly valuable.
Hopefully.
What have you found that sort of made it possible for you to keep? What are the best resources or support groups that have been helpful to you for other people that might be?
So now
what you do.
So I think depending on where you are, there might be a lot of good offline resources. So there are things like in the UK, there's Macmillan Cancer Centres around, there's Maggie's, again, cancer centre. And I've heard those can be good. Online, there's loads of support, but of very varying quality. And I think particularly at the beginning, it can be quite overwhelming. Just, the terminology people use, like people will write about seeing Ned again, and you're like, what on earth is that? And Ned, NED, no evidence of disease.
These things that become really familiar to you.
Exactly, and just also the technical stuff. So understanding the difference between an MRI scan and a PET scan and a CT scan and a fluoroscope and ultrasound, and just understanding these different scanning. For me now, after 6.5 years, it is just routine. So
what's the most surprising thing that you've learned from all of this that pops into mind?
So rather depressingly, that a lot of doctors, a lot of cancer doctors have very, very little knowledge of new treatments and new knowledge about cancer. And that's very surprising until you understand the workload they're dealing with, the number of patients they're dealing with, and the number of new treatments. New meaning not this year, but like past 10 years or past 20 years even. Because if you have an oncologist who is in their 40s, when they went to medical school and they did maybe a little bit about radiotherapy and a little bit about chemotherapy and a little bit about oncological surgery. And
Mm.
then throughout their career, they've updated bits of that, but it's just impossible for them to have the depth of specialist knowledge in these different areas. And those are
Mm.
just three of the kind of eight ways that cancer is, or eight broad ways of treating cancer at the moment. There'll be many ways of treating cancer that the oncologist has heard mentioned at a conference a few years ago, or they've read one article about in a medical journal.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're somewhere where there's not so much population, or there's the low population density, then your oncologist might not be a specialist in your cancer. So my oncologist is a specialist is a GI oncologist, a gastrointestinal oncologist. But
Mm.
I
Mm.
know of plenty of cancer patients, even with quite common types of cancer, where their oncologist deals with like several different kinds of cancer and obviously has a little bit of knowledge of each one. And if you have a rarer type of cancer, then it's very
Yeah.
unlikely in most countries you'd be speaking to a specialist. So that's the biggest surprise.
One of my questions is what are you, since the start of your treatment in general, what are you most proud of starting? And has that is
I'm not a proud person by any stretch of the imagination. If you forced me to say I was proud of something, then I am proud of not being distracted and misled by the false information out there. So like when you're told you have a terminal disease and it's going to kill you quite quickly, I think it's very natural to be kind of desperate and to like look everywhere and just think, what can I do? What can I do? And you might kind of
yeah.
believe things that you usually wouldn't believe because you're desperate to believe. And there are lots of distractions, there are lots of treatments and like lifestyle things and stuff to control symptoms, and a lot of it is not. So a lot of it is not proven. A lot of it has been proven not to
Mm.
work. Some of it's quite damaging.
Mm.
But I need to kind of find the origin of this. But someone said, be open-minded but not empty-minded about this kind of thing. So I've kind of, just tried to judge the things on the reality of the information and information sources. So a good example of this is if you get lots of subjective reports on something that doesn't like add up to objective data, it doesn't matter how many subjective
Yeah.
reports you have, you cannot add it
It
up.
does make you feel like it's more true.
Yeah, but you have to fight that because your life depends on it.
Yeah.
So being aware of things like survivor bias, where you again, you might, let's say you join a online group about natural remedies for cancer, and you see all these people taking these herbal medicines and doing really well, and of course you don't see the 99.9% of the people who took them and didn't do well and therefore didn't live to tell the story. So that's an example of survivor
So what
bias.
did you do that was different then? Did you look at these groups, say, ah, these people have survived well? How do you dig into it and find out that
So one thing, just googling and I mean the cliche, follow the money, right? So it's are there people sharing stories who are then also trying to sell you this stuff? Are there people like twisting claims, I guess? Are there people making big claims without evidence, but those claims are influencing other people? And often it's
mm,
quite obvious, like people will claim that they've got some amazing result, and then almost in the same breath, they'll be sharing other people's results that I happen to know are untrue just because of being familiar with the case. And it's almost like the way they're doing it, like they're trying to back up what they're saying. Like, you can believe that I got a good result because such and such a celebrity got a good result, or because there's this guy in Massachusetts who's made a web page about this. Well, that kind of discredits them quite a lot, right? If they're having to back up their claim. So looking out for that kind of thing. And then the trifecta of cancer quackery that I see again and again and again is where people either no, I don't, either or like self-diagnosed or just not really diagnosed. So they're like, oh well, I I went to the market and this person was there and they said you've got your liver is full of tumors, buy this tea from me and then it will be fine. So self-diagnosis or kind of like misunderstanding their diagnosis. So things like they go to hospital, they have a scan for some symptom, and the oncologist says uh, you have precancerous cells that could turn into cancer. You should keep an eye on it. And this person then goes online and says, I was diagnosed with cancer and I've been drinking this smoothie every day this week and I just got a clear scan. Isn't it amazing? It's like, well, no, you decided you were diagnosed with cancer, even though the oncologist said essentially you do not have cancer yet. So there's like self-diagnosis, self-diagnosis. There's the self declaration of being cured, for example, like someone will have a clear scan and say, oh, the doctors were amazed and they've said I'm cured. Well, no doctors would say that from a clear scan because typically for most cancers it seems you need like 3 to 5 years of clear scans and clear blood tests to say that you're cancer free, and longer research tends to find it should be even longer. So a lot of oncologists dealing with breast cancer now saying like 10 years of clear scans are kind of the benchmark. And then the third thing of the trifecta of cancer quackery is a person says, I took this pill for dogs and it cured my cancer. And then you look into their case and it's like, and this is a real case I'm talking about, the guy is on a clinical trial for a really powerful cancer drug that was designed to cure cancer and happened to be a good responder. This is a very, very famous case where this person is promoting a pill for dogs. This is the pill the pharmaceutical industry doesn't want you to know about. Look, it cured my cancer. And you're like, well, yeah, but the guy was in a clinical trial for a drug called Keytruda and got a good response, as many people do, and has therefore decided that this dog pill cured their cancer. So those three things crop up again and again and again and again, and they're not mutually exclusive. So sometimes it's like the person has declared themselves having cancer and they've gone and done some weird wacky thing and then they've declared themselves cancer free. Yeah, so
I've not heard that trifecta of cancer quackery before.
no, that's something that I came up with, and I should probably, I don't know, can I copyright that, or I'll do a book on it, the trifecta of cancer quackery.
Oh, definitely.